work speaks for itself. I know that you've made social connection one of the deepest focus of your work. Why is that? Why is it so important for a physician, and for a physician of a country of the size of the United States, putting this on the radar and advocating so strongly for it?
Well, let me just say, I'm just thrilled to be here, Karen. Thank you for the kind invitation. And I just also want to recognize what you have done to build this community, to create this experience. And it's not just powerful because of the work, but because of your own story and how you turn personal tragedy into a mission to help all of us throughout the world find greater fulfillment, happiness, and well-being in our lives. So thank you for being an incredible role model and leader as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
And for me, this work on loneliness was not part of some 10-point plan that I had when I first came into office. But as with most good things that come in life, it came about through the process of actually listening to people who I was meeting all around the country. And people would often tell me their stories when I traveled, especially when I did town halls. And very often I would ask people just a very simple question, which is, how can I be helpful? And then I just try to listen. And people talked about all kinds of issues, but I found more and more that the issue of loneliness was coming up. And it was coming up very indirectly by people who would say, I just feel like there's nobody who really knows me for who I am. I can't be myself. This is college students who were often talking. There are a lot of busy parents, who were juggling jobs and taking care of kids and everything. And they would say, I'm juggling so much. There's so much on my plate, but I just have to manage all this by myself. There's no one to help. And then there were other people throughout the lifespan who just felt invisible. You often use that word invisible. Say, I feel invisible, or if I disappeared tomorrow, no one would care. And hearing that again and again, what I was hearing was that people were feeling lonely and isolated. So I started using that word. And it was almost like this light bulb of recognition went off in people's eyes. I'll even just ask all of you here, if you think about your people in your life, how many people here know somebody who's struggling with loneliness or isolation? Just raise your hand. Yeah, so almost everyone. This has become a near universal phenomenon. But that kind of got me interested in it. And it made me reflect on my own life, Karen. And when I did so, I realized that I had also struggled a lot with loneliness in my life. As a kid growing up in Miami, I was different from other kids, in terms of my background, the food we ate at home, religion, customs, everything. And I was also very introverted and shy, so I felt like an outsider a lot. And the other thing is that because of that, I had a hard time making friends. And so for me, the scariest time of day, Karen, was actually lunchtime in school.
It happens to a lot of kids.
Because then you walk into the cafeteria and you don't know if you're going to be somebody to sit next to. Mm-hmm. Right? So I remember that. I still viscerally remember that feeling as a third grader and a fourth grader. But then even as an adult, there were times where I struggled with loneliness. After my first stint as Surgeon General, when I served in the Obama administration, I remember there was a time of real profound loneliness and isolation for me, and I struggled to recognize that and to deal with it. And as a doctor, I was just seeing so many of my patients who were struggling with loneliness. So I was never taught about loneliness in medical school or in residency training, yet from the moment I set foot in the hospital and started talking to patients, after telling me about the chest pain that brought them in, or the infection on their leg that brought them into the hospital, if I was able to sit and listen long enough, they would start talking about their lives, right? And this is the thing about being a medical student, is that you have more time to actually sit and talk to patients, which is a really important thing to do. And so I was starting to hear that patients were actually alone. And even later, when I finished my training and when we had a really difficult diagnosis to give patients, or when we had some difficult news to share with them, I would often say to them, is there somebody you'd want me to call to be here with you, during this conversation? And so often, Karen, and this was heartbreaking, people would say, I wish there was somebody, but there's no one. I'll just have to have a conversation by myself. And that was always heartbreaking to hear. So as I kept those stories in my head and my heart and started digging into the research around it, I realized just two very powerful things. One was that loneliness is extraordinarily common. In the US, 1 in 2 adults are living with measurable levels of loneliness, but the numbers are even higher among kids. In the UK, the numbers are actually quite similar. And many other parts of the world are struggling with this too. But the other thing I realized is, in addition to being common, it was also consequential for our health. That people who were struggling with being socially disconnected from others, they had higher risk of anxiety, depression, and suicide. But they also had a higher risk of physical illness, so 29% increase in the risk of heart disease, 31% increase in the risk of stroke, 50% increase in the risk of dementia among older people, and an increase in mortality and premature death that was comparable to what we see with smoking, and even greater than that which we see with obesity. So it became clear to me after looking at this that not only has loneliness reached epidemic proportions, but it is also having a profound impact, public health impact, like on our lives and on society. And this is the last piece I'll share, which is that this is not just an individual problem. This is something that we have to care about at a societal level, because we've seen that now when people struggle with social disconnection, it impacts how our kids perform in school. It impacts how people perform in the workplace in terms of creativity, productivity, engagement, and retention. It impacts polarization and division in society. And too many of our countries are struggling with growing polarization and division, and that fosters and festers when we are disconnected from one another. So for all these reasons, I came to believe, Karen, that loneliness is a profound public health and societal challenge that we have to look at not just as 49 on the list of 50 or 100 issues to deal with, but that we have to see as a foundational issue. Like when the foundation of your house, is compromised, you rush to take action because you know everything else would collapse if that foundation breaks down. The statistics and stories we're seeing on loneliness and isolation tell us that the foundation for well-being, fulfillment, and happiness is at risk, and we have to rush to fix it, which is why this effort to rebuild social connection in our lives and in the world could not be more urgent or important.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you for sharing all that really important data that, we see we need to act. It makes sense on all the dimensions that we care for as individuals and societies. And it resonates with what we've been hearing from the different speakers throughout, that this is really about people, and so the absence of people for us, or connections, real, authentic connections, leaves us in a very negative place on all health dimensions. And so what can we do as individuals and in schools, in workplaces, in our communities to increase this healthy social connection? Because we also have that, well, how many connections do you have? I have 3,000 connections. Somebody told me recently that on Instagram, if I didn't have 15,000 connections, I wasn't taken seriously. And I'm like, okay, that's okay. I don't really engage in social media. But how do we turn the bus around and kind of educate people like this is authentic connection? Because I think our kids don't really know, and maybe some of us have forgotten what that nourishing feeling is like. Earlier, Arthur Brooks talked about we need friends who are, what did he say, useless? Useless, meaning there's just love. They're not going to do anything for you. It's just that, like you were saying, it's a person who's with you in the waiting room or in the diagnosis, and it's just there to be your friend and to show you love. How do we turn it around?
Well, one thing I would say is that the friends who just give you love are the most useful friends.
Yeah.
Because love is what we need. It's what we need. And I think that, look, and I'm actually so glad that you had Arthur here. Arthur is brilliant. He's a wonderful human being, a good friend, and has done such great work in this space around happiness. And Arthur and I have talked a lot about love and about how it is the most treasured resource that we also most undervalue, right? Like when we think about friendships and relationships, so often we think about it in functional terms. What can this person do for me? Can they help me get a job? Can they help me do this? That's what networking is all about. But there's something bigger, that we need to do. And one other thing I'll just say, and then let's talk about how we build these connections. I actually think what you just said, really struck a chord in me. You said we have to remember that people are really important. That is such a simple but powerful statement. And it's not an obvious statement to make, because today what's happening is that technology is increasingly replacing people. right? And I'm not just talking about in the workplace, I'm talking about in our personal lives, right? So we assume, okay, well, I got friends online, so maybe I don't need to get together with my friends as often. We may not make that conscious decision, but we make that de facto decision sometimes. Like, I'm not going to go out, I'm just going to hang out and maybe check and see what my friends are doing on social, right? But we also, as we look at the evolution of technology, at the prospect of more and more AI, artificial intelligence, powered platforms in our lives, I think the temptation which you already see is to assume that innovations in technology mean that we can just replace people, that we don't need caregivers, we can just have robots, that we don't need doctors and nurses, we can just have robots. Hey, we don't even need friends or girlfriends or boyfriends. We can have an AI chatbot that fulfills our needs. Like, these sound almost hard to believe, but they are literally what is being said and experimented with and developed right now. And I'm a big fan of technology in general. I spent years building a technology company in the past. Like, I'm a believer, I'm a user of technology. But I think technology is most powerful when we fully understand its impact and manage its drawbacks and recognize also what it cannot do. And we cannot allow ourselves to live in a world or to live lives in which people are replaced by technology, because there is no substitute for in-person relationships. There's no substitute for that. And it's not to say that technology can't supplement us. Look, I think take healthcare as an example. Like, technology can do a lot to actually enable better care, to bring more information, more data, more up-to-date studies to the point of care so that you get the best possible diagnosis and treatment. But that does not mean that a machine can hold your hand when you're going through a difficult time and look into your eyes and understand your story the way a human being was. It doesn't mean that a machine can give you the love and compassion that we all need and deserve, like in our lives, especially when we're going through illness. That's fundamentally a human calling and a human function. And that's one of the reasons why I think we've got to recognize that, because what's happening right now is a lot of people are also feeling devalued. They're feeling like they don't matter. And because that's what the world is telling them. And I say this because this is what young people tell me all the time. Like, we just finished, my team and I, a college tour in the United States, where we traveled to campuses all around the country, talking to young people about their mental health and well-being, about loneliness and isolation. And this is so often what we hear, is that people are searching for something that tells them that they matter. They're trying to understand, like, what their purpose is also in life. And society is not guiding, I think, young people right now to the right answers there. It's telling them often that they matter less, or their mattering is conditional, that they matter based on what they can create and what they can build in terms of monetary value, but it's not telling them that their compassion matters, that their kindness matters, that the love that they can give to others and support they can provide, that matters. In terms of purpose, so many young people tell me that the hustle culture in society is telling them that they've got to drive toward building their brand, gaining followers, building a public profile, getting accolades, getting fancy jobs. There's nothing wrong with any of those things. Many people in this room have achieved those things and more. The problem is when we tell people that and that alone is what's going to give you happiness and fulfillment, because we know it doesn't, right? We know that, when people, and we talked about this yesterday, if you really want to know what brings people fulfillment, you ask them at the end of their life, right? And I've been privileged to sit with patients in those final hours and days of their life, and to hold their hands and to listen to their stories as they reflect on the most meaningful threads of life that are bubbling up to the surface. And they don't talk about, the number of followers they had on social media. They're not talking about, they hit a certain amount in terms of their net worth. They're not talking about the promotions they got, how big their corner office was, how many people came to their Christmas party. That's not what they talk about at the end of life. They talk about people, about their relationships, about the ones that brought them joy, about the ones that brought great love into their life, about the relationships that broke their heart. And we don't have to wait until the end to realize that powerful life lesson. But what our young people are telling us in stories and statistics is that society is giving them a very different message. And we've got to change that so that young people know, and all people know, that you matter not because of what you can create in terms of the money and products and services, but you fundamentally matter because you are a human being who can give and receive love. People need to know also that there's no purpose that's greater than being able to serve and improve and help the lives of others, and whether that's raising great children, or whether that's helping your friends, or whether that's building a wonderful movement like Karen has done to help lift people up all around the world. And if we want to start people down this path, I think we can recognize that there are very simple things we can start to do today to build greater connection in our life. We can take 15 minutes a day to reach out to people we care about, just to check on them, to see how they're doing. Second, we can make sure that when we're with other people, that we give them the blessing of our full attention. And we do that by putting away our devices and focusing on them. I suspect if I asked by show of hands, how many people here would like to add a 25th hour to the day so you have another hour to do more things? Anybody, any takers here? Anyone want more time? Hungry for more time? Like, we're all looking for more time. Well, your attention actually has the power to stretch time. If you ever have had the experience of being in conversation with someone when they were fully present, when they weren't distracted by their screens, but they were looking into your eyes, they were listening to you, they were processing what you were saying, and they were sharing honestly and openly, 5 minutes of conversation like that can feel like half an hour. And the flip is true too, right? You can be on the phone with somebody for an hour while they're flipping through their inbox and checking their mail and doing all kinds of things. At the end of the hour, you're like, I don't know, I feel like we didn't really catch up, right? So we can stretch time. It's a simple thing we can do. And the third thing we can do as individuals is we can look for opportunities to help people. Service is one of the most powerful antidotes we have to loneliness. And service doesn't have to be, I'm going to go and volunteer for an organization in my community, although it could be that. But we serve in many small ways too. When we see a colleague who's struggling at work, just stopping by for 2 minutes at the end of that meeting just to say, hey, I just want to check on you. You're doing okay? How are things going? Making sure that you call to check on a friend who might be struggling because they recently had a relationship breakup, or maybe they lost their job or didn't get a job that they really wanted. Those are small acts of service. Even greeting someone, in the grocery store who might be ahead of you in line. I remember back in the day when you used to put coins in the toll on the highway. Does anybody remember this? Am I dating myself? Okay, this sounds vaguely familiar. Okay, there used to be this practice, Karen, that you might remember also, where sometimes you'd put the 25 cents or the dollar into the bin, but you could also put some extra for the person behind you.
Yes.
Right? And sometimes we would just do that. We didn't know who the random person was on the highway behind us, but there was just something that felt good about doing something for someone, even if you weren't going to get any recognition, or public recognition or anything. And that person would usually be surprised, and they would just flash their lights or honk at you, just to show a small moment of appreciation. These small acts of service are the glue that holds us together. They remind us not just of the act, but of the underlying value, which is that kindness and compassion should matter, that they have a place in society, and that we need more of that, not less. So these are small things we can do as individuals, but look, this has to be a societal undertaking to rebuild connection. We need schools to also be places where kids can learn how to build healthy relationships, where they can build the social emotional skills for doing that. We need in workplaces to cultivate connection, and there are small, simple ways we can do that with a little bit of time, a little bit of structure, bring people together in the workplace to actually share their story, to talk a little bit about their own lives, to be able to know one another, which is so important because we are more than our skill sets, we're human beings. And as a society, as a government also has a role here. In the UK has actually been a phenomenal leader globally in helping to kick off what is increasingly becoming a global movement to address loneliness and isolation, developing the first national strategy here in the UK, appointing a minister to focus on loneliness and isolation. But governments can focus a society on an issue by calling it out as a priority, can convene people around it, invest resources in valuable research to help expand our understanding of how to address a challenge like loneliness and what solutions work. We've got to operate at all these levels. if we truly want to do what is called for now, which is to stitch back together the fabric of society, because that's a fabric that will hold us up and will support us in our own fulfillment, and will support schools and workplaces and all the endeavors that we're seeking to do right now.
So first of all, thank you for that, and thank you for the college tour that you've done. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the podcast that you have also, because you're about putting this knowledge out there and you show up and you have skin in the game. And that's so wonderful because, you know, there are so many leaders that pay lip service but don't do the walk, and you do the walk. So that's evident. Something you said yesterday at the Wellbeing Policy Forum I thought was really, really awesome. And you were talking about the youth, and you said that they've accustomed to feel comfortable with, you know, socializing on social media and their devices, and that perhaps now they feel uncomfortable when they're in person, and that they have to go through the discomfort, right? And it's so important to also understand that it's okay to be uncomfortable a little bit and to step out, because we know that these are the benefits that are going to raise the resilience for everything else that they need to do in their lives. When you talked about the societal support, don't you think that we need to redefine success? Are we confusing kids with how we define success, and maybe also employees in the workplace?
I do, and this is a question we actually ask on the road all the time. Is we ask young people, how do you define success? And what's interesting to me is that the definitions are usually very extrinsic, and it's not about who am I, how am I showing up in the world, what am I contributing. It's often about what can I acquire, right? Can I acquire fame? Can I acquire followers? Can I acquire fortune? Can I acquire power, right? And those things are looked at as success. And you can't blame young people for this, because think about it. Those are the people who have achieved those things are the people we write books about, we write newspaper articles about, we make movies about them. So, and then of course now they're the people who trend on social media, and it's not a surprise that young people are looking at that and saying, oh, okay, I guess that's what I have to do. But if you spend time with people who've achieved all those things, and they include people in this room, you know that that's not the key to happiness and fulfillment. And the truth is, a lot of young people know that too. They know that inside, which is why in these conversations they say that they feel burned out by this hustle culture, and they often ask me, what are we hustling toward? Is it really going to make us happy? And I think we have to be honest about the fact that the answer is no. And look, I know we live in a time of like celebrity worship, right? Where we hold people, who are famous up to be, almost like demigod status. And there's nothing wrong with being famous, don't get me wrong. But it's important we know where that falls, like in the grand scheme of things, in terms of what we need and want for our children, what brings happiness. I think what we want our kids to know, and the way we want them to look at success, should be that, one, success is about serving. But how are we contributing to the world around us? Success is about knowing yourself and your values and living those out. Is it important to be kind? Is it important to be generous? Is it important to be compassionate? Is it important to be inclusive and to invite other people in? How do I live that out, like in my life? And am I doing a good job of that? Like, these to me are very, very important determinants of success. When I think about my own kids, and you mentioned, having skin in the game, I think a lot of us have skin in the game when it comes to this, because we're thinking about our own happiness. We're also thinking about our family and our friends. And I'm no different. I'm thinking about my 6 and 7-year-old, who are just delightful human beings. I'm biased, obviously. But I'll tell you one thing that they have taught me. They taught me a lot of things. And one thing I think when you become a parent is you realize that you're really becoming a student in a lot of ways, because you've got so much to learn. Much to learn. But one of the things, and many things my kids have taught me, is about what our true nature is from the earliest of stages. So I noticed that my kids, and like all kids, they're curious, they're creative, they express themselves, they like to be affectionate, they give hugs when they're happy, they're also honest about when they're not happy. they also find fascination and happiness in simple things. A funny shadow on the wall. They're like, oh, that looks like a dragon. And they start making up a story about a dragon, right? These are things that I miss. They notice and they find joy in them, right? Truth is, we all are born with the ability to do that. That's actually our nature. And then things happen to us along the way. We get told that, hey, if you're too nice to other people, they'll take advantage of you. You should be suspicious, right? We're told that, don't waste your time on all those like little things. You focus on keep your eye on the prize. Keep your goals like fundamentally in mind. If you want that job, don't pay attention to anything else. You go after that job, right? Like these are the things that we tell our kids, and then you stop paying attention to the small acts, of wonder and beauty around you. You start looking at people perhaps with a little bit more suspicion. You start looking at kindness as evidence of weakness and not a source of strength. The only way that changes, and it has to change if we fundamentally want to heal as a society. It has to change if we want our kids to go down a path that's truly going to leave them fulfilled and happy. But the way that has to change is we have to tell our kids a different story about success. It has to be more than about words. They have to see and feel the story. And those stories come through the example we set as parents and as elders around them. It comes from the books they read, from the movies they watch, from the TV shows they see, from the articles that they read. Like all of these have to start telling a story that says, actually being kind matters and it's cool. That says that knowing who you are and living out these values of generosity, that they matter, that serving others, that's a cool and honorable and exciting and desirable thing to do. And there are times in the past in society where at various points we have valued this more than we do now. We've held up people who are public servants. We still do to this day. Think about active leaders like Mandela and Gandhi and Martin Luther King, and we hold them up, not because they were rich, not because they were famous, in their time, but because of their passion to serve and the sacrifices they made to lift up other people. We've got to make that important again when it comes to purpose. So anyway, this is the work that's ahead of us. And look, you don't change the definition of success with a law. Right? This is not about the policies you pass. This is about the culture you shape. And the good news about that is that you don't have to wait for legislators to act to change culture. We can do that. Right? And culture is not monolithic also. They're microcultures. We can start changing the culture in our communities, in our friend circles, in our schools. I think even about something like you alluded to social media earlier, Karen. Like one of the things a lot of parents are struggling with right now is how to manage social media for their kids, right? I see the heads nodding. I see like, yes. I'm worried about this too. And my kids are 6 and 7. You'll be like, you don't have anything to worry about. Well, my daughter, my 6-year-old was 4 when she was in preschool. She came home one day and asked my wife and I if we could post a picture on Instagram of her.
4.
We don't even use like social media much. We never talked to her about it. Like, where did this come from? Her preschool classmates were talking about posting pictures on Instagram, right? So my point is, this starts early. It's a challenge for all parents. But when it comes to culture, I think one of the things that we can start to do is, as parents, we can start talking to one another about how we want social media to be present or not in our kids' lives. We can start drawing boundaries in our children's lives around core areas that we want to protect, like their sleep, in-person interaction, and their learning, and say these are times when we're not going to allow our kids to use their devices because we want to protect sleep, relationships, and learning. And this is hard to do by yourself. This is very hard to do by yourself. And so many parents have said to me, well, what do I do when my kid comes up to me and says, everybody else has an account?
Yeah.
They're all talking about stuff that I'm not going to know about. They're talking about activities that I'm not going to be a part of. Like, do you want me to be even lonelier? And what do you do when your kid says that, right? It's really hard. And this is actually why we have to work together as parents. Because if we're not saying you're the only one, but we're saying, no, look, I'm smarter than you think. And I've had a conversation with the other parents in the class. And a bunch of us, 4, 5, 6 of us, have all decided that these are the boundaries we're going to draw. And so you're not the only one, but Johnny and Susie and Carrie and Macy, they're all actually, all of their parents are having them do the same thing. Then this becomes a lot less intimidating for the child, but also a lot easier for the parents. So we have to have each other's backs as parents and support each other. And I say this because it might seem obvious. Of course, parents talk about all kinds of things. Parents are not talking about this enough with each other. And I have a theory as to why. I think it's partly because parents feel a sense of shame around it. They feel like because they haven't figured it out for their kids, that they're doing something wrong as a parent, because they look around and it seems like everyone else somehow seems to be going along and doing their thing, and no one else seems to be complaining, so maybe the fault is with me. And I know this in part because, like, even for my kids, we have a text list, a group chat, if you will, for the kindergarten class and the second grade class. And I kid you not, like, my phone is buzzing all the time with text messages that are going to this group. My phone has buzzed even in my pocket while we've been talking, right? And I am 95% sure it is from that text chain with the other parents. And that's a wonderful thing. People are talking about, hey, what's, or what are if other people waiting for Spirit Week? Is anyone going to the gala to raise money for the school? Like, who signed their kid up for camp? Anybody, any spots left in the basketball camp? These are all the fun things, important things that we're talking about. But in all of those texts, and it's about 70 texts a day, 70 texts, 70. In all of those, there has never been a single text over the last few years about, hey, is anybody having trouble managing like tech for your kids? But the thing is, even at their age, we see during play dates that parents are like having fights with their kids about the iPad. Like, hey, no, I told you couldn't watch it. Why are you watching that? How did you get into that? I thought I set the code here and the restrictions and curated this. Like, how'd you find that thing that's only for 16 plus, 68, 16 and up? Like, this literally happened the other day, right? So parents are struggling, but they're not talking about it. Yeah. And I think that is a huge challenge. So we've got to have each other's backs as parents. We've got to support each other, because managing social media for your kids is not easy, but we have to do it because the current path we're on, where our kids in the United States, for example, are using social media on average 4.8 hours a day, right? Where kids are telling us, like time and time again, in all of these roundtables they do, I mean, they bring it up. They say that while there are some benefits that they're getting from social media in terms of finding out what's going on campus, connecting with other students, sometimes being able to express themselves, and those are good things, right? But right alongside those are a raft of harms, where many of them say they feel worse about themselves when they're constantly comparing themselves to other people online. They find also that they, in addition to the comparison, that they often feel left out when they see kids doing things without them. And they talk about just how much time they're actually spending on social media and how it's hard to break away. They use the word addicted. They say, I feel like we're addicted, but we just don't know what to do about it. One girl finally, she stood up and she just said, plainly, we are all addicted to social media. She's like, that's the truth. And every head was nodding. And look, I understand that feeling, but when we were down in Miami, one of the students actually told me, she said, I live close to campus. My parents are right here, 10, 15 minutes away. But she's like, so often it's happened that I had a 3-hour block to go and see them. And I'm like, I'm just gonna check social media for 10 minutes. Oh, God. And 3 hours later, I'm still there and I've missed my window to go see my family. And if that sounds like, oh, this is a simple willpower issue, she just needs to buck up and build up her will. Well, I tell you that most of us, if we grew up with technology like this, would be doing the same thing. And if we're honest about it, many of us as adults are having this experience where we think we're gonna check for 10 minutes and then 2 hours later, we're still there. And it's not, again, because somehow there's a massive genetic mutation in the willpower gene that's affected the entire world. That's not what's happening. It's the environment that has fundamentally changed. And that environment is technology. The platforms are designed to maximize how much time we spend on them. That's not a bug, it's a feature. Okay, and these products are designed by the best product engineers in the world. Right? So you're telling an adolescent boy or girl that they've got to somehow summon the willpower to defy the design of the best product engineers in the world. That is the definition of an unfair fight. Yeah. And that's why we've got to help young people. We've got to have their backs as parents and have each other's backs. It's also why, though, what I called for in 2023 when I issued a Surgeon General's advisory on social media and youth mental health is that we need to have safety standards that policymakers put in place and actually enforce. Standards that have teeth. Because sometimes frankly, it's tiresome to hear the excuses from policymakers on this. Oh, it's too complicated. The genie's already out of the bottle. It's an election year, can't do anything. Like the usual excuses that you hear. But what is happening right now is fundamentally a dereliction of duty. It's an abandonment of responsibility to fulfill our most sacred obligation as a society, which is to take care of our kids. And lastly, just consider this whenever you hear these excuses. Just that we have done this before, where we have had new technology that's come on the scene that's posed a benefit but also a threat, and we've made it safer. We did that with cars. I remember growing up, the rate of car accident-related deaths was pretty high, right? Now, we didn't say, that's just the price of modernity. Oh, well, everyone just do your best. Good luck. We didn't say that. We said, yeah, there's some benefits cars bring, but we got to make them safer. So what we did, like in the United States, and we did this in other countries around the world, is we actually put in place tough national standards for vehicles that ultimately got us seatbelts and airbags and crash testing and a host of other safety measures that have now become the default in most cars. And those did reduce the number of car accident-related deaths, right? But what's happening right now is we are doing the equivalent of putting our kids in cars that have no safety features that are effective or proven to be effective, or putting them on roads with no stop signs, no speed limits, and no traffic lights. And we're saying, good luck. Hope you get there. And we're blaming it on the child or on the parent when things don't go well. So the bottom line is we know how to address this, but we've got to actually summon the will and the courage to take action. And all of us have to make sure that our leaders know that this is important to us. Because what could be more important to us than our children? Look, I know that our time is coming to a close, but one thing I do just want to say, as we just thinking about everything we've been talking about today, is that this issue of well-being that we're talking about, this is the issue of our time. Yes. This is what we have to focus on. Because everything that we have tried to develop, like over history, whether it's technological advancements, whether it's better medicines, whether it's innovations in education, all of this is ultimately so that we can live happier, healthier, more fulfilled lives. But somehow along the way, I worry that we have lost sight of that end goal. And we've come to focus on technology for technology's sake. We've come to focus on other indicators. Again, whether it's position or money or fame or other things, and those are almost distractions in a way from the fundamental goal, which is to make sure people are happy, healthy, and fulfilled. And putting that back at the center of the equation.
Absolutely.
As the primary goal of policy, as a primary goal of our programs, as a primary goal that we hold in our personal lives. That could not be more important. And we've got to do it not just for ourselves, but because there is a generation growing up today that is wondering if it's possible at all to live that kind of life, that's looking at the future and is feeling worried and pessimistic and scared. It's looking at the generations above it and saying, I'm not sure that they have the solutions to the big challenges that face us today. But this is why we've got to put well-being back at the center. And what we have to cultivate once again in society, and perhaps in a new way and a bigger way than we've ever had before, is we have to cultivate an ethic of commitment to one another. That society cannot function if we're all out for ourselves. It can only work if we recognize that our future is truly interdependent, that my success and fulfillment depends on yours, and that if your kids are not well off, then all of society should care and should step up and spring to action. That if an elderly family, is not doing well and is struggling, that we should all figure out how we can help them. Like, society only works if we do that. But rebuilding that social contract, that's what we're called to do right now, to reaffirm our commitment to one another, to rebuild an ethic of compassion, caring, and love, and to redefine success on those bases so that our kids look up to that and say, that is what success is. It's being kind and loving. It's living up to my full potential. It's being creative and contributing to the world in all the extraordinary ways that I know I can. It's in appreciating the wonder that's around me. And it's in having faith that together, that we can do extraordinary things, that we can achieve extraordinary fulfillment, and that we can ensure that everybody in the world can enjoy the well-being that we know is ultimately our birthright.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you. And I want to say that this is also what leadership looks like. This is Leadership 2.0. So thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. If you enjoyed this amazing well-being content, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel.